When the immortal emperor of mankind tore through reality into the Watchmen universe, he expected to find a world needing salvation. Instead, he found a humanity that had already rejected its heroes and learned to survive through lies, brutality, and moral compromise. What happens now when the immortal emperor who built an empire on necessary evil meets a reality where heroism itself is the poison? The sky above New York City split open like a wound on the evening of October 12, 1985. It was not the clean tear of science fiction or the theatrical drama of comic book invasions. This was something worse. The fabric of existence simply gave up, peeling back to reveal a light that hurt to look at, a golden radiance that seemed to judge everything it touched. The people in the streets below had been rioting. They were angry about the Keene Act, angry about masked vigilantes, angry about a government that seemed to care more about stopping costumed adventurers than fixing the problems of everyday life. Signs reading, "Who watches the Watchmen?" lay scattered on the pavement alongside broken glass and burning trash cans. Police in riot gear faced off against crowds that had grown tired of being told what heroes they could and could not have. Then he came through. A figure descended from the impossible tear in reality, wreathed in armor that gleamed like the sun itself. He was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with a face of terrible beauty framed by hair as black as the void between stars. Each piece of his golden armor was covered in symbols that seemed to move when you looked at them directly, causing headaches and nosebleeds to those who stared too long. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived, and his very presence changed everything. The rioters collapsed first, not violently, not dramatically, but simply falling where they stood as if someone had flipped a switch in their brains. Then the police fell. Then everyone within a 6-block radius. They dropped like puppets with cut strings, unconscious before they hit the ground. The psychic pressure of the Emperor's mind was too much for unprepared humans to withstand. As he touched down on the cracked pavement of 42nd Street, the ground beneath his feet turned to golden crystal, spreading outward in a perfect circle. The Emperor looked around at the scene before him. This was not what he had expected. He had torn through dimensions, fleeing his own dying reality, seeking a new humanity to protect and guide. But this place felt wrong. The architecture was familiar enough, recognizably human, but everything was covered in grime and decay. Graffiti marked the walls. Trash piled in the corners. The very air tasted of pollution and despair. And strangest of all, the unconscious people around him wore buttons and carried signs rejecting the very concept of heroes. In his reality, humanity had begged for salvation. Here, they seemed to have given up on it entirely. He extended his vast consciousness outward, reading the psychic impressions left on this world like fingerprints on glass. What he found disturbed him. This earth had no aliens pressing at its borders, no demons clawing at the gates of reality. No ancient evils waiting to devour humanity whole. The threats here were entirely human in origin. War, nuclear annihilation, environmental collapse, corruption. But most troubling of all, he sensed a deep cynicism in the collective unconscious of this world. These people had seen their heroes fail. They had watched as costumed vigilantes became violent, unstable, or tyrannical. They had learned not to trust saviors. A sound broke his concentration. Footsteps, deliberately heavy, coming from an alley to his left. The Emperor turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. A short man in a brown trench coat and a mask that showed constantly shifting ink blots where his face should be. The man carried himself with absolute certainty despite his small size, despite facing a golden giant who had just knocked out hundreds of people with his mind alone. "Another mask," the figure said, his voice rough and uncompromising. "Another pretender. Come to save us from ourselves." The Emperor studied this strange being. Unlike everyone else, this man remained conscious, his mind protected by something the Emperor could not immediately identify. Not power, but conviction so absolute it formed a kind of shield. "I am the Emperor of Mankind," he replied, his voice resonating through the empty street. "I have come to unite humanity, to protect your species from the darkness that threatens all existence." The masked man laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Heard that before. Heard it from Veidt, heard it from Manhattan, heard it from every man who put on a costume and decided he knew better than everyone else what the world needed." He pulled a newspaper from his coat, tossing it at the Emperor's feet. The headline read, "Keene Act passes, costumed adventurers outlawed. Your kind already tried saving us. Didn't work. World rejected you. World was right to reject you." Before the Emperor could respond, the masked man turned and walked away, disappearing back into the alley as if a 12-foot-tall golden giant was nothing worth staying to observe. The Emperor stood alone in the street, surrounded by hundreds of unconscious humans, holding a newspaper that declared heroes to be criminals. For the first time in thousands of years, he felt something close to doubt. Far above the Earth, on the rust-colored surface of Mars, another being sensed the dimensional breach. Dr. Manhattan stood among the crystalline structures he had been building, his blue form glowing softly in the thin atmosphere. He existed partially outside of time, seeing past and future simultaneously, and he had known this moment was coming. An intruder from another reality, a being of immense psychic power, a pattern he had seen before in different forms across different timelines. Without hurry, because time meant little to him, he began the process of returning to Earth. In Antarctica, in a fortress hidden beneath the ice, a different mind processed the data streaming in from satellites and monitoring stations worldwide. Adrian Veidt, the smartest man on Earth, watched footage of the Golden Figure's arrival on multiple screens. His brilliant mind was already calculating possibilities, running scenarios, adjusting his plans. He had spent years preparing to save humanity through a carefully orchestrated deception. Now this variable had appeared, this dimensional intruder with godlike power. Veidt's fingers moved across keyboards with inhuman speed, gathering information, analyzing patterns, searching for weaknesses. Every problem had a solution. Every threat could be neutralized or utilized. This Emperor would be no different. Back in New York, the Emperor stood before the United Nations building as dawn broke over the city. The unconscious people had been taken to hospitals where doctors struggled to understand what had happened. The Emperor had walked through the night, observing this strange world. He had seen the homeless sleeping in doorways, the prostitutes on corners, the drug dealers conducting business in plain sight. He had passed by newspaper stands showing headlines about nuclear tensions with the Soviet Union, about proxy wars, about the doomsday clock moving ever closer to midnight. This world was dying just like his had been, but unlike his reality, no one here seemed to believe salvation was possible. The guards at the UN building raised their weapons as he approached. "Stop right there!" one shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The Emperor did not stop. The bullets they fired simply hung in the air, inches from his armor, suspended by his will alone. He walked through the entrance, the doors tearing from their hinges at his psychic command. Inside, he made his way to the General Assembly, where representatives from every nation on Earth had gathered for an emergency session about the previous night's events. The Emperor stood before them, his massive form filling the chamber with golden light. "I am the Emperor of mankind," he declared, his voice reaching not just the people in the room, but every human mind within 100 miles. "I have come from a reality where humanity stood on the brink of extinction. I guided them. I united them. I forged them into an empire that spans the galaxy. Your world faces the same choice mine once did. Accept unity under my guidance, or face annihilation alone." The chamber erupted in chaos. Some representatives shouted in anger. Others sat in stunned silence. A few had collapsed, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure of his presence, but one voice cut through the noise. "We've heard this speech before." The Secretary General stood, his face pale but determined. "Every tyrant in history claimed to be saving us. We stopped believing that lie a long time ago." The Emperor looked at the sea of faces before him, and he saw something he had rarely encountered in his long existence. Not fear, not hope, but exhaustion. These people were tired, tired of threats, tired of saviors, tired of being told they needed protecting. They had rejected their heroes not because they were weak, but because they had learned that heroes often caused more harm than good. For the first time since his arrival, the Emperor wondered if this reality's humanity had already traveled further down the path he had walked than he realized. Perhaps they did not need his guidance. Perhaps they had already learned the lessons he had spent 10,000 years teaching. And that thought terrified him more than any demon or alien ever had. The Emperor established himself atop the Rockefeller Center, the tallest accessible point in Midtown Manhattan. From there, his consciousness spread across the city like invisible roots, touching minds, reading thoughts, searching for the power structures that controlled this broken world. What he found puzzled him deeply. The governments were weak, paralyzed by fear of nuclear war. The people were cynical, trusting no one. And the heroes, the costumed vigilantes who should have been protecting humanity, were either retired, hiding, or dead. This world had already passed through its age of heroes and emerged on the other side, disillusioned and damaged. On his third night in this reality, the Emperor sensed something that made him pause. A presence unlike anything else on this planet, not human, or at least not anymore. A being that existed partially outside normal space and time, whose very atomic structure had been fundamentally altered. The presence was approaching from beyond Earth's atmosphere, moving at speeds that defied conventional physics. The Emperor turned his gaze skyward and waited. Dr. Manhattan materialized on the rooftop without warning or sound. One moment the space was empty, the next a glowing blue figure stood there, naked and unconcerned with human conventions of modesty. He was tall, perfectly proportioned, his skin emanating a soft blue light that cast strange shadows across the rooftop. But it was his eyes that struck the Emperor most. They held no emotion, no judgment, no interest. They simply observed. "You are not from this reality," Dr. Manhattan stated. It was not a question. His voice was calm, measured, as if discussing the weather rather than dimensional travel. "I watched you arrive. I have watched many things. In 4 years there will be a war. In 7 years the Soviet Union will collapse. In 20 years the internet will change human communication forever. Your arrival changes some of these timelines. Not all. Interesting." The Emperor studied this strange being with growing fascination. His psychic powers, which could dominate nearly any mind in his own reality, simply slid off Dr. Manhattan like water off glass. It was not resistance exactly, more like trying to grab smoke. "You speak of the future as if it has already happened," the Emperor observed. "From my perspective, it has," Dr. Manhattan replied. "Past, present, and future exist simultaneously. I experience all of them at once. Your mind is vast, perhaps the largest human consciousness I have encountered. But you are still bound by linear time. You see causality as a chain. I see it as a pattern, endlessly repeating with minor variations." The Emperor felt something he had not experienced in millennia. Not quite respect, but recognition of an equal. "What are you?" he asked. "I was John Osterman, a physicist. There was an accident. My intrinsic field was removed. I was scattered across time and space. Then I reassembled myself, atom by atom, into this." Dr. Manhattan looked at his own hand as if seeing it for the first time. "I can manipulate matter at the subatomic level. I perceive quantum mechanics directly. I exist in multiple places simultaneously. But I am losing interest in human affairs. They seem so small now, so brief, like watching insects argue over breadcrumbs." "You have abandoned your responsibility to protect them," the Emperor said, and there was judgment in his voice now. "You possess godlike power, yet you stand aside while humanity stumbles toward extinction." Dr. Manhattan tilted his head slightly. "Responsibility is a human construct, a pattern of neurons firing in response to social conditioning. I no longer find it compelling." He gestured toward the city below. "You believe you can save them. You have believed this for 10,000 years in your reality. You built an empire. You became a god to them. And yet you are here, fleeing a reality that was ending despite everything you did. Perhaps your methods are also just patterns, repeating endlessly without achieving the desired outcome." The words struck deeper than any weapon could have. The Emperor's fists clenched, golden energy crackling around them. "I did not flee. I sought a new beginning, a chance to guide humanity before the mistakes of my reality could be repeated." "You sought to repeat the same pattern in a new place," Dr. Manhattan corrected gently. "I have seen this before. Not you specifically, but the archetype, the powerful guardian who believes order must be imposed. It never works permanently. Entropy increases. Systems decay. Humanity continues making the same mistakes regardless of how tightly you control them." Before the Emperor could respond, Dr. Manhattan vanished, existing suddenly on Mars and Earth simultaneously. His consciousness spread across millions of miles. His voice continued from everywhere and nowhere. "There is another here who shares your philosophy, Adrian Veidt, the smartest man in the world. He also believes he knows what is best for humanity. You should meet him. The conversation will be illuminating." Then Dr. Manhattan's presence withdrew entirely, leaving the Emperor alone on the rooftop with more questions than answers. For the first time since his arrival, doubt crept into his certainty. What if this detached godling was right? What if 10,000 years of guidance had taught the Emperor nothing except how to repeat the same failures in different forms? The meeting with Ozymandias happened 3 days later in Antarctica. The Emperor had simply appeared in Vite's hidden fortress, bypassing all security systems through pure force of will. He materialized in a vast chamber filled with television screens showing news feeds from around the world. At the center of it all stood a man in a golden costume, his face uncovered, smiling as if he had been expecting this visit all along. Adrian Veidt was beautiful in the way Greek statues were beautiful, all perfect proportions and classical features. But his eyes held an intelligence that bordered on inhuman, constantly calculating, measuring, planning. "Emperor," he said warmly, spreading his arms in welcome. "I've been hoping you would come. We have much to discuss." "You know of me," the Emperor stated. "I know everything worth knowing," Veidt replied without arrogance, simply stating fact. "I've been monitoring your movements since your arrival. Fascinating, really. A psychic entity of immense power appearing from another dimension. Under normal circumstances, I would view you as a threat to be eliminated. But these are not normal circumstances." The Emperor walked deeper into the chamber, his massive form dwarfing Veidt. "What circumstances do you refer to?" Veidt pressed a button, and the television screens changed. Now they showed maps, calculations, probability charts. "The world is dying, Emperor. Not might die, not could die, is dying. The United States and Soviet Union move closer to nuclear war every day. The doomsday clock stands at 4 minutes to midnight. If current trends continue, humanity will destroy itself within the next decade. Every model, every simulation, every calculation I have run confirms this. Then unite them," the Emperor said simply. "Force them to see reason. Impose order before chaos consumes everything." Veidt's smile widened. "Exactly. Finally, someone who understands. The politicians will not act. They are too afraid of losing power. The people will not act. They are too divided by ideology. Even Dr. Manhattan will not act. He has lost interest in human survival. So I will act. I have spent years developing a solution. A way to unite humanity through shared experience, shared trauma, shared purpose." The Emperor listened as Veidt explained his plan. It was brilliant in its brutality. He would fake an alien invasion, manufacturing a catastrophic event that would kill millions but save billions by giving humanity a common enemy. Nations would unite against the external threat. Nuclear arsenals would be turned away from each other toward the stars. Peace would emerge from precisely calculated genocide. "You intend to murder millions of your own people," the Emperor said slowly, "to save the rest from themselves." "Yes," Veidt replied without hesitation. "Is that not precisely what you have done across 10,000 years? How many died in your unification wars? How many were sacrificed to build your empire? How many worlds burned so that humanity as a species could survive?" "We are the same, Emperor. We see the math that others refuse to calculate. We understand that some deaths now prevent more deaths later. We do what is necessary, no matter how terrible." The Emperor stared at this human who spoke with such casual certainty about mass murder. And the horrible truth was that Veidt was right. The Emperor had made these calculations countless times. He had ordered the deaths of billions across his long crusade. He had destroyed entire worlds when they could not be brought into compliance. He had told himself it was necessary, that the alternative was extinction, that strong leadership required hard choices. Now he saw those same justifications reflected back at him from a human mind, and they sounded monstrous. "There must be another way," the Emperor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Veidt shook his head sadly. "I have considered every alternative. Spent years running simulations with the world's most advanced computer systems. This is the only path that leads to human survival with acceptable probability. You know I am right, Emperor. You know because you have walked this same path in your own reality. The only difference is I am honest about what I am doing. I do not pretend my tyranny is benevolence. I do not demand worship or gratitude. I will do what must be done, and then I will live with the knowledge of what I have become." The Emperor's hands clenched into fists. "When?" "Soon," Veidt replied. "Okay, very soon, and I would appreciate if you did not interfere. Your power could stop me, yes, but then what? The nuclear countdown continues. Humanity destroys itself slowly instead of being saved quickly. Is that truly the more moral choice?" Before the Emperor could answer, an alarm blared throughout the facility. On the screens, a new image appeared. A figure in a brown trench coat and shifting mask stood in what looked like a sewer tunnel holding a notebook. Veidt's expression darkened for the first time. "Rorschach," he muttered. the one variable I could not fully control. The Emperor recognized the name. This was the masked man who had confronted him on the first night, the one whose mind had been shielded by absolute conviction. Who is he? A vigilante. Retired, supposedly, but he never really stopped. He has been investigating the death of another costumed adventurer, a man called the Comedian. That investigation has led him dangerously close to discovering my plan. Veidt's fingers moved across controls. I will have to deal with him. Unfortunate. I respected his dedication, even if his methods were crude. The Emperor watched the screens as they tracked Rorschach's movements through the city sewers. This small, violent man represented something the Emperor had not seen in this reality yet. True heroism, perhaps, or true madness. It was difficult to tell the difference. Rorschach refused to compromise, refused to accept that evil could be necessary, refused to bow to anyone's version of the greater good. In the Emperor's reality, such men either joined his cause or died as obstacles. There was no middle ground in his empire for those who would not bend. He will expose everything, Veidt continued. The Comedian's death, my plan, all of it. I cannot allow that. The world needs this solution, even if they never know what I did for them. You would kill him to preserve your secret, the Emperor said. Without hesitation, Veidt confirmed. Would you not, do the same? How many whistleblowers and rebels did you silence across your 10,000-year reign? How many voices of dissent did you crush because they threatened the stability of your empire? Again, Emperor, we are the same. The only difference is I accept what I am. The Emperor turned away from the screens, away from Veidt's knowing smile, away from the uncomfortable mirror being held up to his own methods. He had come to this reality expecting to find a humanity that needed saving. Instead, he found a humanity that had already learned his lessons, already walked his path, and emerged from it broken and cynical. They did not need another savior. They had rejected salvation itself as a concept. I will not help you, the Emperor said finally. But neither will I stop you. Not yet. I must consider what I have learned here. Fair enough, Veidt replied, already turning back to his calculations. But decide quickly, Emperor. The clock is ticking, and humanity does not have the luxury of infinite contemplation. Act or step aside, but do not pretend there is a third option. There never is. The Emperor departed, returning to his perch atop Rockefeller Center. Below him, the city continued its nightly rhythms. People went to work, came home, made love, argued, dreamed of better futures they no longer believed would come. They had learned to survive without heroes. They had adapted to a world where the only people who could save them were themselves, and they had decided that was an acceptable burden to bear. In the sewers below, Rorschach continued his investigation, following a trail of corruption and conspiracy that led toward the unthinkable. His journal, kept in dense handwriting that recorded every discovery, every suspicion, every crime witnessed but not yet punished, grew thicker. He did not know about the Emperor yet, did not know about Veidt's plan in its entirety. But he knew enough to be dangerous, knew that something terrible was being hidden, knew that the Comedian had died because he discovered a secret worth killing for. And high above Earth, Dr. Manhattan observed it all with detached interest. The Emperor's crisis of conscience, Veidt's careful preparations, Rorschach's relentless pursuit of truth. From his perspective outside time, he had already seen how this would end. Multiple endings actually, probability branches splitting and rejoining. In some timelines, the Emperor stopped Veidt. In others, he helped him. In still others, he did nothing at all. The outcomes varied, but the pattern remained the same. Humanity survived or died based on choices made by those who believed they knew better than everyone else what the world needed. Dr. Manhattan found it all very predictable, very human, very uninteresting. He returned his attention to his work on Mars, building crystal structures whose purpose even he did not fully understand yet. The Emperor sat alone on his perch as dawn broke over New York City. The sky turned from black to gray to pale blue, and he watched it all with eyes that had seen 10,000 such dawns on 10,000 different worlds. He had built an empire. He had guided humanity across the stars. He had become the very thing this reality had rejected. And now, faced with a man who used his own methods with cold honesty, the Emperor finally understood what Dr. Manhattan had been trying to tell him. Patterns repeated, control failed, entropy increased, and perhaps the greatest tyranny was believing you knew better than billions of other humans what choices they should be allowed to make. The Emperor spent the next 6 days observing this world, trying to understand what made it different from his own. He walked the streets invisible to human eyes, his psychic powers hiding him from detection. He watched families eat dinner in cramped apartments. He saw workers emerge exhausted from factories. He witnessed crime and kindness, cruelty and compassion, all the small moments that made up human existence. And everywhere he went, he sensed the same underlying current: fear. Not of aliens or demons, but of themselves, of what they might do to each other if given the chance. On the seventh day, he felt it. A shift in the psychic landscape, a sudden acceleration of plans long in motion. From Antarctica, Veidt's preparations were entering their final phase. The Emperor extended his consciousness toward that frozen fortress and found it alive with activity. Scientists worked around the clock on technology they did not fully understand. Artists created images of horrors from beyond space. Psychics, kidnapped and drugged, were being used to fuel something vast and terrible. Veidt moved through it all like a conductor before an orchestra, coordinating each element with perfect precision. The Emperor made his decision. He would confront Veidt directly, see this plan with his own eyes, and then determine if intervention was necessary. He tore through space itself, materializing in Antarctica in an instant. The journey that would have taken normal humans days happened in a heartbeat. Before him rose Veidt's fortress, a structure of gleaming metal and glass that seemed to defy the hostile environment around it. Security systems detected his arrival immediately, but they were useless against his power. Automated weapons fired, energy barriers activated. None of it mattered. The Emperor simply walked forward, and reality bent to let him pass. He found Veidt in the central laboratory, a space the size of an aircraft hangar filled with machinery that hummed with barely contained power. At the room's center sat something that made even the Emperor pause. It was organic and mechanical at once, a massive structure that pulsed with unnatural life. Tentacles as thick as tree trunks emerged from a body that seemed to shift and change as he looked at it. This was the alien, the fake invader that would unite humanity through shared horror. "Magnificent, is it not?" Veidt said from behind him. The Emperor turned to see the golden-costumed man standing on a high platform, looking down at his creation with obvious pride. Based on actual deep-sea organisms, enhanced with cloned tissue from a genuine psychic. When it appears in New York, it will die, but not before broadcasting a psychic scream that will reach every mind on Earth. Millions will die from the initial shock. Millions more from the destruction of its physical arrival. But billions will survive, united by the knowledge that something from beyond threatens them all. The Emperor climbed toward Veidt's platform, each step deliberate and measured. "You speak of this atrocity as if it were a work of art." "It is," Veidt replied simply. "Perhaps the greatest work of art in human history. A sculpture carved from 3 million lives, creating a new world from the ashes of the old. Future generations will live in peace because of what I do today. They will never know my name, never understand the sacrifice I made to save them. That is acceptable. Heroes do not act for recognition. Heroes do not murder innocents," the Emperor countered, but his voice lacked the certainty it once held. Veidt smiled sadly. "Do they not? What is war but organized murder of innocents? What is statecraft but calculated sacrifice of the few for the many? You know this, Emperor. Your entire existence proves you know this. How many innocents died on worlds that refused to join your empire? How many children burned because their parents would not bow to your unification?" The Emperor's massive hand shot out, gripping the railing of Veidt's platform hard enough to bend the metal. "I gave them a choice. Submit or face consequences. You give your victims no choice at all." "Semantics," Veidt dismissed. "A choice between submission and death is no real choice. At least I am honest enough not to pretend otherwise, and I do not demand worship or gratitude afterward. I will be hated if the truth ever emerges. I accept that burden." Before the Emperor could respond, alarm screamed throughout the facility. On monitors around the laboratory, a new image appeared. Dr. Manhattan, glowing bright blue, had materialized somewhere in the complex. And with him were others. 2 figures in costume, a man and a woman, clearly former vigilantes drawn out of retirement by desperate circumstances. "Silk Spectre and Night Owl," Veidt said, reading the Emperor's confusion. "Former partners, now lovers. They have joined Manhattan's investigation. How touching that they think they can stop what is already in motion." The Emperor watched the screens as the 3 intruders moved through the facility. The man called Night Owl wielded technology that was impressive by this world's standards. The woman fought with skill and determination. But it was Dr. Manhattan who drew the Emperor's attention. The Blue God moved with complete confidence, as if he had already seen every outcome and knew exactly which actions to take. "They will reach us in approximately 4 minutes," Veidt said calmly. "Long enough for me to explain something you need to understand. I know you have been debating whether to stop me. I can see it in your posture, hear it in your voice. You are questioning everything you have done across 10,000 years. Dr. Manhattan's words affected you deeply. You wonder if you are a savior or merely another tyrant repeating patterns you are too blind to see." The Emperor said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "Let me help you with that decision," Veidt continued. "My plan is already in motion. Not here, not this creature in this laboratory. That is merely a backup, insurance if my primary approach fails. The real device, the real alien, is already in New York. Even as we speak, it nears completion. In 17 minutes, it will activate. 3 million people will die. The world will unite. Humanity will be saved. You cannot stop this, Emperor. You would have to travel to New York, locate the device, and destroy it in less time than it would take you to fully understand its construction. Even your vast powers have limits." The words hit like physical blows. The Emperor's consciousness reached out, stretching toward New York, and he felt it. A psychic signature building beneath the city, hidden in spaces carved out over months of secret construction. Veidt was right. Even moving at speeds that bent physics, the Emperor could not reach it, analyze it, and destroy it before activation. Not with certainty. Not without risking failure. "Why tell me this?" the Emperor demanded. "Why not simply let me discover it too late?" "Because I want you to understand something," Veidt said, and for the first time his voice held genuine emotion. "I want you to face the same choice I faced. Intervene and possibly save 3 million lives, but guarantee the deaths of billions in nuclear fire within the decade. Or allow the sacrifice. Accept the mathematics and preserve humanity's future. Which choice makes you a hero, Emperor? Which makes you a monster? Or are they perhaps the same thing?" The laboratory doors exploded inward. Night Owl and Silk Spectre burst through, weapons ready. Behind them, Dr. Manhattan appeared without transition, simply existing where he had not existed a moment before. The Blue God looked at the massive organic structure at the room's center, at Veidt standing calm and confident, at the Emperor torn by indecision. "You are too late," Veidt announced to all of them. "By the time you comprehend what I have done, it will already be complete. New York will burn, the world will change, and you will have to decide if you want to preserve that change or reveal the truth and plunge humanity back into chaos." Silk Spectre raised her weapon. "You're insane. You're talking about killing millions of people." "I am saving billions," Veidt corrected. "Do the math, Lori. Nuclear war kills 5 billion people. My plan kills 3 million. Which outcome is preferable?" Night Owl's voice shook with rage. "You don't get to make that choice for everyone else. That's not heroism. That's playing God." Veidt gestured toward the Emperor. "Then what do you call what he does? He has controlled the fate of trillions across 10,000 years. Every decision he made determined who lived and who died. Is he a villain because he exercised power, or a hero because his intentions were good? The outcome is the same either way. People died so that his vision of humanity could survive." Dr. Manhattan spoke for the first time since arriving. His voice was quiet, almost sad. "In 11 minutes, 3,742,016 people will die in New York City. I can see them, I can name them, I can describe their final moments. I could prevent this." He paused, looking at his own blue hands. "But I will not. Adrian is correct about the nuclear war. I have seen that timeline too. 5.3 billion deaths within 18 months. Children melting in atomic fire, ecosystems collapsing, the survivors envying the dead. If his plan succeeds, that does not happen. The mathematics favor his approach." "Mathematics!" Silk Spectre shouted. "These are people, not numbers." "All people are numbers," Dr. Manhattan replied without emotion. "Carbon atoms arranged in specific patterns. The universe does not distinguish between 3 million and 5 billion. It simply processes the transformation from one state to another. Only humans assign meaning to the difference." The Emperor listened to this exchange and felt something break inside him. 10,000 years of certainty crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. He had always believed his choices were righteous because his intentions were pure. He protected humanity from itself, from aliens, from demons, from chaos. But Veidt protected humanity through calculated murder. Dr. Manhattan protected nothing because protection implied caring, and caring was a human weakness he had transcended. Where did the Emperor fall on that spectrum? Was he closer to Veidt's cold pragmatism, or Manhattan's detached observation? And if he could not answer that question, how could he claim to be humanity's rightful guide? "We have to tell people," Night Owl insisted. "If this happens, we tell the world the truth. We expose Veidt for what he is." "And then what?" Veidt challenged. "The governments that nearly started nuclear war suddenly become peaceful because they know the alien was fake? Or do they use that knowledge as an excuse to return to hostility, this time with the added resentment of having been deceived? You risk billions to save your conscience, Daniel. That is not heroism. That is cowardice disguised as morality." The Emperor made his choice. He extended his hand toward Veidt, golden energy gathering around his fingers. "I will stop you. I will travel to New York. I will find your device. I may fail, but I must try. I have spent 10,000 years making choices for humanity. I will not stand aside now and let you make the same mistake I have made countless times before." But before he could act, reality itself seemed to scream. Every psychic sense the Emperor possessed suddenly blazed with warning. Something vast and terrible had awakened. Not in New York. Not yet. But the device was active, building toward its catastrophic release. He could feel millions of minds, unaware of the doom about to descend upon them. Could feel the precise moment 13 minutes in the future when those minds would simply cease to exist. "It is done," Veidt said quietly. "The countdown cannot be stopped. Even if you destroy the device now, it will detonate. I designed it to be fail-safe. The only choice remaining is how you respond to what I have achieved." Rorschach arrived then, smashing through a ventilation shaft and dropping into the laboratory with his grappling gun. His shifting mask seemed to reflect the horror of what he was hearing. "Heard everything," he rasped. "Transmitted it all. Evidence. Proof. World will know what you have done." Veidt's expression finally showed something other than calm confidence. Surprise. He had not accounted for Rorschach's presence, had not calculated that the obsessive vigilante would find a way into his fortress. "Who did you transmit to?" Veidt demanded. "Everyone who will listen," Rorschach replied. "Newspapers, radio stations, evidence lockers, multiple redundant copies. Cannot silence truth, cannot make me complicit in genocide." The Emperor saw the next moments unfold with terrible clarity. Veidt would try to kill Rorschach to preserve his secret. Dr. Manhattan would allow it because human morality no longer compelled him to intervene. Night Owl and Silk Spectre would fight back, trying to protect their ally, but they were only human. And the Emperor would have to choose right now, in this moment, which side of this equation he stood on. But then something unexpected happened. Dr. Manhattan spoke, and his words changed everything. "It does not matter if the truth emerges. I have seen that timeline. The world remains united despite knowing the deception. The shared trauma is too great. The peace is preserved even after the lie is exposed. Adrian's plan succeeds regardless of whether his secret is kept." Veidt stared at the blue god. "You never told me that was a possibility." "You never asked," Dr. Manhattan replied. "You assumed secrecy was essential. I saw no reason to correct that assumption. It was interesting to observe how you would respond to the variable of exposure." The Emperor felt reality shift around that revelation. If the truth did not matter, if peace could survive honesty, then perhaps there was another way forward. Not Veidt's way of necessary evil hidden behind lies. Not his own way of imposed order backed by overwhelming force. But something else. Something this universe had perhaps already figured out while he and Veidt were still clinging to their ancient certainties. "Stop the device," the Emperor commanded. "Now! Or I will tear this entire facility apart and you with it." Veidt shook his head. "I cannot. It is already too late. The reaction has begun. In 9 minutes, New York dies and humanity lives. That was always the bargain." The Emperor closed his eyes, reaching out with his vast psychic powers toward the distant city. He could not stop the device, could not prevent what was about to happen. But perhaps he could do something else, something he had never attempted in all his long existence. Not control, not domination, not salvation imposed from above, but a choice freely offered. The Emperor's consciousness expanded across the hundreds of miles between Antarctica and New York City in an instant. His psychic presence touched 3,742,016 minds simultaneously. Every person within the blast radius of Veidt's device. What he did next had never been attempted in his 10,000 years of existence. He did not control them. He did not dominate their thoughts or override their will. Instead, he simply showed them the truth. He showed them the device buried beneath their city, ticking down its final minutes. He showed them Vight's plan, the calculated sacrifice, the cold mathematics that had decided their deaths would save billions. He showed them the nuclear war that would come if they lived, the burning cities and melted children and radioactive wastelands. And then, impossibly, he gave them a choice. Each mind, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, received the same message. You can run, but there is not enough time to escape. You can try to stop the device, but it is designed to be unstoppable. Or you can accept what comes, knowing that your death prevents a greater catastrophe. I cannot save you. I can only show you why you are dying. The choice of how to face that death belongs to you alone. In Antarctica, Veidt watched his monitors in growing horror as the psychic broadcast rippled across New York. On screens showing street cameras, people stopped moving. Some collapsed to their knees. Others stood frozen, processing impossible information directly downloaded into their minds. Parents clutched children. Strangers reached for strangers. The city held its breath as 3 million people simultaneously confronted their own mortality and the reason for it. "What have you done?" Veidt whispered, his perfect composure finally cracking. "You have destroyed everything. The plan only works if they believe in an external threat. If they know the truth, if they know it was one of their own, the unity will shatter before it forms." The Emperor opened his eyes, and they burned with golden fire. "You assumed they needed to be tricked into unity. You assumed they could not handle truth. That assumption is what makes you a tyrant, Veidt, not your willingness to sacrifice. I have made the same assumption for 10,000 years. I was wrong. Perhaps they are stronger than either of us believed." Dr. Manhattan tilted his head, observing the timeline branches splitting and reforming with new possibilities. "Interesting. The outcome is no longer certain. Before, Adrian's plan had a 97.3% chance of success. Now it fluctuates wildly. 40%, 62%, 38%. The choice to reveal the truth has introduced genuine chaos into the system." Rorschach stood perfectly still, his shifting mask reflecting rapid changes in his own emotional state. "You gave them truth. More than I could have. More than anyone has. They deserve truth. Whatever happens next, they face it with open eyes." Silk Spectre was crying, watching the monitors as New York processed the impossible choice. "Those are people down there, real people with families and dreams and futures. How can you all stand here talking about percentages and timelines like they are just numbers? Because if we feel too much, we cannot act at all," Night Owl said quietly, his hand finding hers. "And someone has to act. Someone has to make impossible choices. That is the curse of being a hero in a world that has no good options." The countdown reached 5 minutes. On the monitors, something unexpected began to happen. In Central Park, people were gathering. Not running, not panicking, but coming together. They held each other, they sang. Some prayed to gods they had long forgotten. Others simply sat in silence, accepting what came. Families formed tight circles. Strangers became friends in the moments they had left. Throughout the city, in thousands of small moments, humanity demonstrated something neither Veidt nor the Emperor had accounted for. Grace under impossible circumstances. Dignity in the face of death. Unity not because they were tricked, but because they chose it freely. The Emperor watched this unfold and felt something he had not experienced since before his transformation into an immortal being. Humility. These people, these ordinary humans with no powers and no special gifts, faced their extinction with more courage than entire armies in his own reality had shown. They knew they were being sacrificed. They understood the mathematics. And many of them in those final minutes accepted it. Not because they were forced to, not because they were deceived, but because they looked at the alternative, 5 billion dead in nuclear fire, and decided their 3 million deaths were an acceptable price if it truly meant peace. "They are magnificent," the Emperor said softly. "I have guided humanity for millennia, and I never saw them as clearly as I do now. In my reality, I kept them ignorant, told them what to believe, who to fight, how to live. I thought that was protection. It was only control. These people facing death with full knowledge of why they must die have more freedom than all the trillions under my rule ever possessed." Veidt's voice was hollow. "If they know the truth, there is no external threat to unite against. The Soviet Union will not stand down. The nuclear arms race continues. Their sacrifice becomes meaningless. Dr. Manhattan spoke then, his voice carrying the weight of having seen across time itself. Not meaningless. Different. In timelines where they died believing in an alien threat, unity lasted 12 years before fracturing. In timelines where truth was revealed posthumously, unity lasted 8 years. But in this timeline, where they die knowing the truth and accepting it anyway, something else becomes possible. A unity based not on shared fear, but on shared sacrifice willingly given. That timeline extends beyond my ability to accurately perceive. It becomes genuinely unpredictable. 3 minutes remained. The Emperor made his second choice. He reached out with his power, not to the dying millions, but to the world beyond New York, to Moscow and Beijing and London and every capital city where leaders sat with their fingers near nuclear buttons. He showed them what he had shown New York, the device, the plan, the choice their fellow humans were making right now. 3 million accepting death to save 5 billion. And he added one message. They are dying for you, for your children, for a chance at peace. Will you honor their sacrifice or waste it? In the Kremlin, aging Soviet leaders saw the vision and wept. In the White House, President Nixon stared at the ceiling of the Oval Office, his hand frozen above the red telephone. In bunkers and bases and command centers around the world, military officers who had spent decades preparing for nuclear war suddenly confronted the reality of what that war would mean. Not abstract numbers, not strategic positions, but 5 billion people reduced to ash while 3 million died willingly to prevent it. 2 minutes. In Antarctica, Veit had fallen to his knees, his perfect certainty shattered. I did not want them to suffer. I designed the death to be instant, painless. They were not supposed to know, not supposed to feel fear or regret. Now they have 2 full minutes to contemplate their own mortality. That is crueler than anything I intended. No, the Emperor replied. You gave them the mercy of ignorance. I gave them the dignity of choice, even if that choice is only how to face the inevitable. That is the difference between your way and what might be a better path. Rorschach moved toward Veit, his voice thick with rage, barely contained. Should kill you now. Should make you pay for what you have done, but they are dying for peace, and starting with murder would betray their sacrifice. So I will let you live, Veit. Let you live with what you have done. That is worse than any death I could give you. 1 minute. The Emperor spoke to New York one final time. I cannot stop what comes. I cannot save you. But I can promise that your deaths will not be hidden. The world will know what you chose, how you faced the end. That knowledge will shame the powerful and inspire the ordinary. You will become the foundation of whatever peace emerges from this horror. Not as victims, but as volunteers. That is all I can offer. 30 seconds. On the monitors, the gathering in Central Park had swelled to thousands. They sang a song, voices rising together in harmony. The Emperor did not recognize the melody, but he understood its meaning. Defiance against the dying of the light. Hope that something better would come from their sacrifice. Love for the humanity they would leave behind. 10 seconds. Veit stood, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. If this works, if peace comes from honest sacrifice rather than comfortable deception, then perhaps I was wrong about more than I realized. But if it fails, if the world returns to hostility despite what these people gave, then their deaths are on your hands, Emperor. You robbed them of the mercy I offered. 5 seconds. Dr. Manhattan observed the timeline one final time. The probability has stabilized. 68% chance of lasting peace. 32% chance of eventual nuclear conflict. Better odds than any other scenario I have observed. The choice to tell the truth has improved the outcome against all logical prediction. Fascinating. 0. The device detonated. The psychic scream that accompanied it reached across the entire planet, a wave of pure telepathic agony as 3,742,016 minds ceased to exist in the same instant. Every human on Earth felt it, a moment of shared suffering that transcended language and culture and ideology. For one terrible second, all of humanity experienced the same loss, the same grief, the same knowledge of what had been sacrificed. Then silence. In New York, where a vibrant city had stood, there was only destruction. Buildings collapsed, streets turned to craters. Fires burned across dozens of blocks. But the psychic component of Vite's weapon, designed to broadcast images of an alien threat, instead carried only the truth the Emperor had seeded into those final moments. The dying minds transmitted not fear of external invasion, but acceptance of necessary sacrifice. Their last thoughts were not of aliens, but of hope that their deaths meant something. The Emperor collapsed, his vast consciousness overwhelmed by the psychic feedback of 3 million deaths experienced simultaneously. Even for a being who had lived 10,000 years, who had witnessed the death of entire worlds, this was too much. These were not deaths in battle, not casualties of war. These were people who had looked extinction in the face and chosen to meet it with grace. Their courage was more than he could bear. Rorschach caught him before he fell completely, the small masked man supporting the massive golden figure with surprising strength. "Did not think gods could break," Rorschach said quietly. "Glad to see you are still human enough to feel what you have done," Dr. Manhattan observed without emotion. "He carries the weight of their choice. Interesting. I can observe death without feeling. He cannot. Perhaps that is the difference between us. Perhaps that is why one of us is a god and the other merely plays at being one." The days that followed were chaos. The world reeled from the psychic scream, from the images of New York burning, from the knowledge that humans had died to prevent something worse. But the Emperor's revelation had changed the narrative. This was not an alien invasion. This was human sacrifice, willing and knowing. And that changed everything. In Moscow, Soviet leaders reached out to Washington with offers of de-escalation. In Washington, President Nixon, shaken by the vision the Emperor had forced into his mind, agreed to arms reduction talks. Around the world, nations that had been edging toward war pulled back from the brink, not because they feared external threats, but because they had seen what 3 million of their fellow humans had given up for peace. Rorschach's evidence emerged as he had planned, detailed documentation of Vite's conspiracy spreading through newspapers and radio stations. But instead of destroying the fragile peace, it strengthened it. The people who died had known the truth, the reports revealed. They had accepted their fate with full knowledge. That made their sacrifice sacred in a way that deception never could have achieved. Vite was denounced as a monster, but the peace he had created through calculated murder was preserved by the honest sacrifice of those who died. The Emperor remained in Antarctica for 7 days, recovering from the psychic trauma of those 3 million deaths. When he finally emerged from Vite's fortress, he found the world changed in ways both subtle and profound. The nuclear arsenals remained, but the will to use them had eroded. The old hostilities persisted, but they felt hollow now, performative rather than genuine. Humanity had stared into the abyss, and some of them had jumped in willingly to save the rest. That knowledge changed the calculus of every conflict that followed. He found Rorschach waiting for him outside the fortress. The masked vigilante stood in the Antarctic wind, seemingly unbothered by the cold. "Come to say goodbye," Rorschach said. "Leaving Earth. Can feel it. Power like yours does not belong here. This world survived by accepting ugly truth. Your presence makes truth complicated." The Emperor nodded slowly. "You are correct. I came to this reality to save humanity from itself. Instead, I watched them save themselves through means I never would have chosen. I thought I understood the burden of leadership, the necessity of hard choices. But I never understood the greatest choice of all, to step back, to let others face their own darkness and find their own light." "Where will you go?" Rorschach asked. "Mars," the Emperor replied. "Dr. Manhattan is leaving to explore other galaxies. Someone should watch over this world from a distance, not controlling, not intervening, just observing, remaining available if truly needed, but trusting humanity to find its own path." He paused, looking up at the stars visible in the clear Antarctic sky. "In my reality, I sat upon a golden throne, kept alive by machines, my consciousness stretched across the galaxy, trying to hold an empire together through sheer force of will. Here I will sit upon a red throne of stone and dust, present but not dominant, a guardian who has finally learned the difference between protection and control." Rorschach extended a gloved hand. The Emperor took it, the massive golden gauntlet enveloping the small human hand completely. "You learned," Rorschach said simply. "More than most gods ever do. Maybe there is hope for you yet." The Emperor departed then, tearing through space in a flash of golden light, leaving Earth behind for the rust-colored surface of Mars. There, among the crystal structures Dr. Manhattan had built and abandoned, he established himself. Not a fortress, not a palace, just a simple dwelling from which to watch the distant blue marble of Earth as it spun through the void. Dr. Manhattan visited once before his final departure for other galaxies. The blue god materialized beside the Emperor without warning, looking out at Earth with those emotionless eyes. "You have chosen imprisonment," Manhattan observed. "Self-imposed exile. Watching but not touching. It will be difficult for one used to control." "Yes," the Emperor agreed, "but necessary. I have ruled for 10,000 years. Perhaps it is time to learn what it means to serve without demanding obedience." "I have seen your future here," Dr. Manhattan said. "Multiple timelines, many possibilities. In some, you maintain your vigil for centuries. In others, you eventually return to Earth when genuine threats emerge. In one particularly interesting timeline, you become a legend, the Golden Watcher of Mars, who appears in humanity's darkest hours, but never stays. They build religions around you, never knowing the truth." "Which timeline do you think most likely?" the Emperor asked. Dr. Manhattan considered this. "The one where you succeed in remaining distant lasts the longest. Humanity thrives most when you trust them to handle their own problems. They fail sometimes, they make terrible mistakes. But they also surprise you with courage and ingenuity you could never have predicted. That timeline shows them eventually reaching the stars on their own terms, not as subjects of your empire, but as independent beings who learn to save themselves." He paused. "That is the timeline where you find peace. Not purpose, not satisfaction, but peace." Then Dr. Manhattan vanished, departing for galaxies unknown, leaving the Emperor alone on Mars. The solitude was absolute. For the first time in 10,000 years, no one demanded his guidance. No one needed his protection. No one required his judgment. He was simply an observer, powerful beyond measure, but choosing not to exercise that power unless absolutely necessary. Years passed. On Earth, the peace held, not perfectly, not without conflict. But the nuclear war never came. The 3 million who died in New York became a sacred memory, a reminder of what humans could sacrifice for each other when they chose to do so freely. Monuments were built, stories were told, and slowly, carefully, humanity began to heal from decades of fear and hostility. The Emperor watched it all from Mars. He saw wars and peace treaties. He saw technological advancement and environmental disasters. He saw humans at their best and their worst. And he did nothing unless specifically asked, which happened rarely. Twice in the first decade, he intervened when threats from beyond Earth emerged. Both times he acted with precision and then immediately withdrew, refusing offers to stay, to guide, to rule. He had learned his lesson. Humanity did not need a golden emperor. They needed space to make their own mistakes and claim their own victories. On the 10th anniversary of the New York sacrifice, the Emperor received an unexpected visitor. Lori Juspechik, the former Silk Spectre, arrived via a spacecraft built with technology shared between nations that had once been enemies. She stood before him in a simple flight suit, older now, gray in her hair, but still carrying herself with the dignity of a hero. "We wanted to say thank you," she said simply, "for giving them a choice, for trusting them with the truth. Vight's way would have worked for a while, but it would have been built on lies. Your way was harder, but it was honest. That matters." "They saved themselves," the Emperor replied. "I merely showed them the options." "That's more than most gods would have done," Lori said. "Most would have chosen for us, or stopped it entirely, or done nothing at all like John did. You found a middle path. You let us be human, messy, and contradictory, and brave. That is a gift greater than any empire." She left him then, returning to Earth with his blessing. And the Emperor sat alone on Mars, watching the blue planet spin, finally understanding what 10,000 years of rule had never taught him. That the greatest act of leadership is knowing when not to lead. That the deepest form of love is trusting those you love to face darkness without you. That humanity's salvation was never something one being could impose, but something each generation had to choose for themselves, over and over in moments large and small. The stars turned overhead. The universe continued its endless expansion. And on a red planet orbiting an unremarkable star, an immortal emperor who had finally learned restraint kept his silent vigil. A guardian who had discovered that sometimes the best way to protect humanity was simply to let them be human.